We are good to go.
Thanks, Shelby. It is now 5. Got it for the second time. Interesting. Good evening. It is now 5:30 according to Computer Standard Time. It is August 11th. My name is Jim Brewer. I'm the hearings officer for the city of Salem. We have one thing on our agenda tonight. It is a appeal of a planning administrator's decision on SPR ADJ-DR 2112. I'm going to outline the procedures that we're going to follow tonight. Of course, because of the COVID pandemic continuing, this hearing is being conducted virtually. Testimony from the neighborhood organization and from people in favor or in opposition are going to be limited to those who signed in before 3 p.m. today, consistent with the city of Salem's process. The way that we'll work things tonight is we'll have a staff report to be presented by Pamela Cole. We'll take the applicant's case presentation. This is a de novo appeal, so the applicant needs to meet its burden of proof and persuasion that it's met all of the applicable criteria. We'll limit the applicant's presentation to 15 minutes. Because this is an appeal, we'll allow the appellant's testimony next. We'll give the appellants also 15 minutes. Then we'll go to testimony from other members of the public who signed in before 3 p.m. And I have 3 people, Don Ruffcorn, Bill Giorso, and Margaret Bates signed up. What we'll ask you to do is I'll call your name. If you would then also give your name and address so the recording picks it up, that would be helpful. Then we'll go to rebuttal by the applicant. That'll be limited in scope to issues that are raised in opposition, and we'll limit that to 5 minutes. Shelby's going to be keeping track of time, and about a minute before time is up, she'll give some kind of signal. At that point, we'll close the public hearing. I need to remind people tonight that people testifying may request a continuance to address additional documents or evidence that were submitted in favor of the application. If this request is made, please identify that new document or evidence during your testimony so I can determine whether a continuance is warranted. People testifying may also request that the record remain open for 7 additional days to submit written evidence. That's again, something that I'd ask you to do during your testimony. I want to direct your attention to the applicable criteria that are found in the notice and in the staff report. The testimony and evidence for the public hearing really should be directed towards these criteria because that's what my decision-making authority is limited to. So the Class 3 site plan review pursuant to SRC 220.005 sub F sub 3, an application for a Class 3 site plan review shall be granted if A, the application meets all the applicable standards of the UDC, B, the transportation system provides for the safe, orderly, and efficient circulation of traffic into and out of the proposed development, and negative impacts to the transportation system are mitigated adequately. C, parking areas and driveways are designed to facilitate safe and efficient movement of vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. And D, the proposed development will be adequately served with city water, sewer, stormwater facilities, and other utilities appropriate to the nature of the development. For the Class 1 adjustments, pursuant to SRC 250.005 sub D sub 1, an application for Class 1 adjustment shall be granted if all the following criteria are met. A, the purpose underlying the specific development standard proposed for adjustment is I, clearly inapplicable to the proposed development, or II, clearly satisfied by the proposed development. B, the proposed adjustment will not unreasonably impact surrounding existing or potential uses or development. There's a Class 1 site design review pursuant to SRC 225.005 sub E sub 1, an application for a Class 1 design review shall be granted if all applicable design review standards are met. Now, this is an appeal, and I have certainly read both the written materials that came in as the statement of appeal, the comments on the planning administrator's decision, and then we've received some other comments today. But I do still need to remind people that failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the city or other parties the opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. So if there's an issue that you want to bring up, this is the time and place to do it, or you may not be able to do so later. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city or its designee to respond to the issue would preclude an action for damages in circuit court. So in terms of any proposed conditions, if there are issues with those need to be addressed now as well. The next thing that I have to ask is what is directed to people who are online. Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds on the holding of this hearing? Meaning this isn't the kind of appeal that should come to the hearings officer. I'm kind of watching, I don't see anybody trying to sign in. If, again, there is a jurisdictional objection, bring it up in your testimony and we can note it then as well. This is the appeal of SPR Adjdr DR 21-12-226 Salem Heights Avenue Southeast, Salem. Pamela, could we have the staff report, please?
Good evening. I'm Pamela Cole, planner with the Community Development Department. Tonight I'm here to discuss the appeal of the planning administrator decision approving site plan review, adjustment, and design review for property located at 226 Salem Heights Avenue Southeast. Tony Martin, the assistant city traffic engineer, is also attending to answer questions about street or alley definitions, other street standards, and traffic. I'd like to enter the staff report, its attachments, in the presentation into the record.
They'll be entered into the record. And I should also say that we've received additional written comments from Don Ruffcorn, dated August 10, Mel Corvaccio, dated August 11th, and Charles and Letty Turner, I believe, also dated, or at least received, August 11th. So those will all be in the record as well. Thank you.
The planning administrator issued the decision in June, and a timely appeal was filed in July. The state mandated deadline is August the 31st, unless an extension is authorized. The proposal includes 10 apartments and 19 parking spaces. Each building has 5 dwelling units and 4 garage stalls. All the parking obtains access from Crawford Street Southeast, which staff has classified as an alley due to its 20-foot right-of-way width. The proposal requires Class 3 site plan review because the applicant intends to pay a fee in lieu of constructing improvements on Salem Heights Avenue Southeast, and also because the applicant requested an adjustment to allow 1 additional parking space over the maximum 18 spaces the Salem Revised Code would allow. This extra space allows the development to include the required ADA space as well as assigned spaces for each unit. The property is located on Salem Heights Avenue Southeast at Crawford Street Southeast. Salem Heights is a collector, and staff again has classified Crawford as an alley due to the 20-foot right-of-way width. Commercial Street Southeast to the east and Liberty Road South to the west are major arterials. A core transit route runs along Commercial Street Southeast. The orange arrows here indicate that the subject property and the tax lot to its west have street frontage on Salem Heights, and the large tax lot west of the southern end of Crawford has street frontage on Liberty Road South. The other lots on Crawford have frontage only on Crawford. The subject property and other properties south of Salem Heights and between Liberty and Triangle Drive are all zoned RM2, multiple family residential 2, Properties north of Salem Heights and east of Triangle are zoned CR Retail Commercial. This aerial is from 2016. It shows the subject property and surrounding development, and the blue arrows again indicate the street frontage on Salem Heights and Liberty. The subject property has a driveway on Salem Heights and a driveway on Crawford. Development standards for multifamily use would require driveway relocation to Crawford. Parking is prohibited in the paved area within the Crawford right-of-way. A few properties have created gravel or paved off-street parking areas that are parallel to this right-of-way. At the southern end of Crawford, the photo shows a slightly widened area of pavement west of the right-of-way and a few parking spaces in the right-of-way. The city generally doesn't allow parking spaces to be striped within right-of-way, but we see on aerial photos that vehicles have been using these parking areas since at least 1995. In the aerial from 2020, it's very similar. It just shows a few changes, including some removal of trees on the subject property. On the site plan, north is on the right and west is at the top. The proposal includes the two buildings. Each has a one-bedroom unit on the ground floor, two two-bedroom units on second floor, and two two-bedroom units on third floor. Because the property is located within a quarter mile of a core transit route and commercial, Salem Revised Code requires no minimum parking for the multifamily development. The applicant has proposed a total of 19 spaces, including one space for each ground floor unit, the ADA space, and two assigned spaces for each two-bedroom unit. For the two-bedroom units, the parking is one stall in a garage and one space in the driveway parking space that leads to the garage. The numbers on the plan indicate the garages 1 through 8 and parking spaces 9 through 19. Conditions require a 5-foot wide paved pedestrian access easement abutting Crawford to be constructed, and it's to be of a visually different material than the 10-foot wide by minimum 20-foot long driveway parking spaces, compact spaces, and ADA space. There's no curb required to divide the pedestrian access easement from Crawford right-of-way, so the pavement along the Crawford frontage of the subject property would effectively be widened to 25 feet approximately, and this could be used in case of emergencies. More than 25 feet of maneuvering area is provided between the back of each parking space and the opposite side of that right-of-way. These are the proposed elevations of the north building, and the south building would be a mirror image. So the garages do face west. These photos are of the existing driveway in Salem Heights and a neighboring property. The existing single-family dwelling on the subject property. The corner and part of the frontage along Salem Heights. A little different view of the intersection of Crawford at Salem Heights. A hedge that's on the property west of Crawford. We have some no parking on pavement signs posted because the 20-foot right-of-way that meets alley standards is too narrow to accommodate both parked and passing vehicles safely. The east side of the property and the existing driveway looking south on Crawford a little farther. And another view of the existing driveway where it meets Crawford. There are a few vehicles parked on private property and a truck that appears to be parked on pavement in the right-of-way, right in front of one of those signs. This was taken in midday and there was not a lot of vehicle traffic at that time of day. And this is the existing driveway that's near the southern property line and also showing the abutting property. The property is within the Fayrite Neighborhood Association and is not within a homeowners association. The Neighborhood Association and citizens provided comments that are summarized on this slide, and these were submitted prior to the planning administrator's decision. Staff responded to those comments in the decision, and these comments are attached to the appeals staff report. The appellant's issues raised are that Crawford Street should be classified as a street because it meets the definition of street rather than alley, and also that the proposed driveways and parking spaces with access to Crawford don't meet the criterion for safe and efficient movement of vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. While staff responded to these issues in the appeals staff report, the appellants also submitted additional written testimony this afternoon and will testify during the hearing. Staff found that Crawford meets some characteristics of a street and some characteristics of an alley. We concluded that the alley designation is appropriate because of the secondary access use by the subject property, because Crawford meets the Public Works design standard for an alley improvement, and because the specific definition of alley as a public way not less than 10 feet and not more than 20 feet in width governs over the more general definition of street. Staff also found that the proposal, based on that designation of Crawford as an alley and with the related conditions of approval for the decision, meets the criterion for safe and efficient movement as well as other applicable criteria. Other comments submitted prior to the appeal hearing. I listed a few on the screen and wanted to point out a few. There was a comment that Crawford should be widened to allow future multifamily development and remedy some of the issues on Crawford. At this time, the city has no plans to widen Crawford. If Crawford is classified as a street, it would have impacts on other properties as well. For example, they would become subject to special setbacks that would be approximately 15 to 20 feet on each side of the current right-of-way to allow for future widening to current street standards, which would be 50 feet for a cul-de-sac or 60 feet in width for a local street. Future development or redevelopment proposals on the properties could be required to provide right-of-way dedications and street improvements. In response to the comment about access to Liberty Street for the large tax lot that's at the southern end of the western side of Crawford that also has frontage on Liberty Street, I just wanted to clarify the city has no intention to require street or other public right-of-way through that tax lot. But if the properties further develop, the applicant or developer could request a driveway on Liberty, and that would be subject to applicable standards at the time of the request. Again, based on the classification of Crawford as an alley and with the conditions of approval that are specified in the decision, the planning administrator found the proposal met the criteria for approval. So staff's recommendation is to affirm the planning administrator's decision. And that concludes my formal presentation. Of course, I'm available to answer questions. Would you like me to leave any particular slides from the presentation on the screen?
You know, at some point, I think one of the overheads, maybe one of the aerials is probably useful to have up, probably whatever the most, maybe the one with the lot configuration.
The aerial photo or the site plan?
Not the, maybe that is a site plan. It's the area. I think there's not the site plan. Please go. I think it's a lot configuration along Crawford. Does that, that would be fine.
Okay, I'll leave that there then.
Okay, so certainly as I've read the appeal material, how to designate Crawford is a pretty important issue. And I understand, I think the way that we got to this, and I understand Mr. Martin is there, so he may join you if he needs to. That seems to be based on looking at the dimensions of Crawford and saying, well, for some percentage, and I think there's a little bit of dispute about whether it's 30% or 11%, it would exceed, but for the majority of the road, it would fall within the dimensions for an alley, therefore it's an alley. I understand that, I think. I'm interested as well in the kind of odd language that it's primarily for secondary access from the definition. And so as I look at lots, in that in the length of Crawford, do we have a feel for what percentage of it is being used as the primary vehicular access?
I didn't calculate the percentages, but the entire eastern side south of the subject property, and it looks like about 75% of the right-of-way west of Crawford would be the only access.
Okay. I don't know if that is convincing to me in one way or another, but I thought it was a piece of information that kind of thought about. The other question that I have really is more of a planning related question. We have a needed housing statute in Oregon, which for residential development raises a lot of concern if standards are not clear and objective. And I think the thing that I am concerned about is if there is ambiguity in the definition of whether this is an alley or a street, what is the effect on the decision? Can I apply a standard one way or the other?
All right. So after discussing this with the planning manager, we looked at whether the needed housing would apply to the determination of whether Crawford is a street or an alley, and did not believe that needed housing is applicable to that. How we process the application after that determination, and we determined that it met clear and objective standards, would be subject to needed housing statutes.
Okay, that's helpful to me in knowing that if there's ambiguity there, it can be resolved and it's not something that just doesn't apply. Okay.
Right, and we'll, as I mentioned, there would be impacts on the subject property, which would include, mentioned in the staff report, that if it was designated as a street, then many different standards would apply: setbacks, street improvements, street widening, special setbacks, right-of-way dedication.
And there may be consequences to other property owners from that. I understand that.
Yes, that's true too.
Is there, do we have any information about, and I seem to remember this in the staff report or the decision, I don't remember which, that the transportation plan itself does not classify Crawford as in any way. It's not something that is called out specifically.
Mr. Martin should answer that question.
Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. The transportation system plan doesn't call out anything below a collector.
Okay.
So it would identify Salem Heights as a collector, commercial, and Liberty as major arterials, but local streets are not called out. And I will say comma, however, there's like one or two in the entire city where we've called them out, but they're very general.
Okay. That was my recollection, and I wanted to confirm that. Why don't we go ahead and we'll move to the applicant's presentation, and if both of you would be available for questions later, I may have some as we wrap up testimony this evening. So with that, if we could, thank you. Mr. Lamprey, I believe you are the applicant, and good evening. If you have a presentation you would like to make, this is the time to do that.
I don't have a presentation. This whole Zoom process is a little out of my wheelhouse. I'm just happy to be here via Zoom. I don't think I could make a full presentation this way. With that being said, I do have some words. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Also, thank you to the city and all the time they've put into this. And also thank you to the neighborhood. I was able to meet with the neighbors in person on site and also have follow-up meetings with neighborhood association leaders. The one thing that is challenging for infill development is you have a lot of parts of the equation, and we feel like we've met and exceeded all the city requirements. In this case, this Crawford issue seems to be a sticking point. But first, I want to just address the items that we've met and exceeded. We've been able to hit right at the requirement for the density for the site, which is important to the city and also towards creating more housing opportunities. When we talk about open space and setbacks, when in infill projects, we really want to protect the neighborhood and the neighboring properties by having as much open space as we can have and provide good landscaping and be a good neighbor surrounding that. With that being said, we are 29 to 30 feet from the east property line, which is a single family home, which is still zoned high density. But while that single family home's there, we worked to design this where we're 30 feet. The current setback could be 10 feet. So we feel like we've done a great job there. Then on Crawford, the east property line setback, we're 32 feet off of that property line. And for visibility's sake, and also for common use down Crawford, we felt that was really important, especially as you come to the corner to turn. Instead of having a building, which it would be allowed on an alley to have a building within 4 feet of Crawford. That would give a 24-foot turn aisle there, 20 feet being Crawford, 4 feet being the setback we would need. So we didn't want to put the building right on Crawford, right? We didn't think that was neighborly, nor did it look good, nor did it feel good. And it really hurt us from an appeal standpoint, from curb appeal. So pushing it back and using parking in this manner creates an environment that is open and people can see, they have eyes on, and we're not using the street to park on. There's no place for people to park on the street because it's all being used with driveways and entrances. That's the other problem that happens on Crawford is people park on Crawford and nobody should. There's no legal place to park on Crawford. So this would, in a lot of ways, eliminate people parking on Crawford because you're not going to park in front of somebody's driveway. At least you shouldn't. You'll get towed, right? So those are the cool things about this project is those setbacks in the open space. Now the open space, I believe in this type of project with some of the amenities there at the city and how you propose it, you could go down to a 20% open space. We're at 47% open space. Almost 50% of the site is open space. And we've done that by going with a 3-story building, 2 3-story buildings, and created parking underneath those buildings. And we feel it's a great design. It fits the neighborhood well. I know, from doing this for a while that there's not a neighborhood that really wants too many buildings being built in their neighborhood. I understand that. But we have put a lot of time and energy. We've owned the property now for close to 4 years of figuring out what is the best proposal we could do. So that's what we brought forward. During the process, I was made known by the city staff during pre-app that Crawford was an alley. That's when we first knew it was an alley, and city staff had shared that. And so that helped us in our design process of where we came to this point today. If it is a street, there are major impacts to this site. There are major impacts to my neighbors all the way down the east and west side of Crawford. The city would have to go through at that point and claim land and probably 10 to 15 feet on both sides, maybe more, to get it up to street standards. I know that the fire chief and fire marshal would get involved. They would want some type of fire turnaround or cul-de-sac. And I don't think that's what any of the neighbors want. I do know that they're upset about traffic. I have at the neighborhood meeting said I would participate tenfold. All 10 units will participate our share to put in any kind of traffic slow down bumps, speed bumps, anything else. We'll participate. We'll be a good neighbor and we'll help control that. So if this is a traffic issue, I want to participate, right? By slowing, however we can slow that down logically with the city engineers and city roads people. That's pretty much it. I don't need 15 minutes. I can open this up for questions. It seems to be a really small, important topic we're talking about on Crawford, but I think the rest of the project stands on its own and is exceptional and meets and exceeds a lot of the city standards. You're mute, James.
I know I was muttering to myself about unmuting. So as you were designing this, and we've got the parking spaces and the garages that are going to need to maneuver into Crawford to get out eventually. How does that work with conflicting traffic coming from, I guess, either direction?
I don't understand the question all the way. What do you mean conflicting?
Well,
traffic?
So I assume people are going to want to continue to go through, and I guess people are backing out at the same time. How do those maneuvers work?
No different than the maneuvers that happen for the 7 or 8 single-family homes that are there, and it shouldn't be conflicting. It should be actually complementing what is already on that street in terms of people backing in, backing out of their driveways. Okay. I also know, and I think city staff as well, I've been at the site during peak traffic and during non-peak traffic. During non-peak traffic, there's very little flow of traffic at all, right? When you get early in the morning, traffic time, and then at 5, you do have some busy. The busiest part and the hardest part to swallow is from Liberty to Commercial is the main problems from my perspective, because it ends up being a fast way to get from Liberty over to Commercial instead of going down to another street. So they come flying down Salem Heights. And so we probably need to slow Salem Heights traffic down too. And I would love to participate slowing that traffic down.
I also realized I forgot to ask you to give us your name and address.
Oh,
be on the recording.
Yes.
I think I gave your name, and I know that your address is probably in the materials, but if you would go ahead and do that, I'd really appreciate it.
Name is Sam H. Lamprey. I'm the owner of Covey Row Houses, LLC, who owns the land. Address is P.O. Box 3432, Salem, Oregon, 97302.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony tonight. We'll move to the next piece. You are going to have an opportunity for rebuttal, so you'll probably want to stick around. Thank you. And with that, I have to move to my next person. The appellants are Charles and Letty Turner. Would you like to make a presentation? And again, I'll give you 15 minutes. Mr. Turner?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, how are you today?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Well, that's 2 good things.
Yeah.
I'm here as well, but I'm going to let my husband speak. I'm Letty.
Okay.
Turner.
Good evening. And if you would give your, Mr. Turner, if you would give your name and address for the recording, that'll be helpful in my keeping track of everything.
Sure. My name is Charles Turner. I live at 3350 Crawford Street, Southeast, Salem 97302.
Thank you. If you have, you're the appellant, we'll give you 15 minutes to make a presentation. As was true of the applicant, you don't need to use it all, but, and I have read your written materials, but I assume you have some points you would like to make.
I certainly do, sir. Thank you. Well, to begin with, sir, we have lived here on this street for 45 years. And on behalf of my wife and myself and many, many people up and down the street, we are objecting to the definition that this is an alley. There have been 37 objections, I believe, that you've received that have classified this, that are object to classifying this as an alley. If we go to the south end of it, which is only 200 and some yards from the stop sign, there is a complex there by the name of Birchwood Court. They did not get questions, and I'm not sure why they didn't get questioned as to why this should take place. Margaret Bates owns that. There's 30 duplexes in there. I've talked with many of the occupants and residents down there, Catholic priests, just blue collar, white collar people. And the majority of them by far are against calling this an alley. So I guess, you know, where does this lead? Well, it's my understanding that Mr. Lamprey has the burden of proof here to show that this is an alley. So I'm going to briefly take you down this street, and I think maybe you've seen it enough in aerial photographs, but I'm going to start and try to go quickly. But from the north end traveling south on the pavement, as you know, it says no parking. The first driveway that we come to is a residence, and that residence sets back about 50 to 75 feet from the street. It has a front yard, it has a turnaround, it has a backyard. It's a typical house along the way. Following that, we have what we call the townhouse apartments. And right there before we get to them is a 20-foot driveway. And at that point, the street widens itself to 21 feet, a little more than 21 feet actually, and there's a curb there. And this distance is 50 yards. From that beginning of that driveway to a fire hydrant beyond on the south end, that is almost exactly 50 yards. After that, we come to another driveway, which is leading to what we call the townhouse apartments. I'm sorry, the Meadowview apartments. And they have a driveway that's about 30 yards long to start with, and then another 20 yards that's for their parking. To the south of them, there's an open area, partly grass, partly open, with some birch trees that are probably 30, 40 feet high. Leaving Meadowview, we go to the next two residents, typical residents, front yards, backyards, that I have. I don't know the length of their lots, I'm sorry. We now come to the end of Crawford Street. At the end of the Crawford Street is a complex of duplexes owned by Margaret Bates and family. These people that live there are 55 and older. The people that operate this, Margaret Bates and family, is a very well-kept, well-designed complex. There's no real outlet for them at all. I know that Pamela said, well, she thought that maybe 75% of the people rely upon this street to get out. No, everybody does. It's 100%, including that complex down there. So once we leave that complex and we start back north, and now on the east side of the street, we have 5 more residences side by side, perpendicular to the street. They were about 100 feet deep, each of them. These homes have private yards in front, they have backyards, they have privacy fences, flowers, gardens, etc. And, you know, just in my case, for example, if I take a look at my property, I think I've got 6 or 7 birch trees right out front, a yard out front, a fence out front. In the backyard, I have 2 large fir trees that are probably 100 feet tall. So I have some description there of those five homes that are traveling north. They are homes. They have backyards and front yards. And lastly, we come to Mr. Lamprey's property, which from that point to the stop sign is 55 yards. So how does this stack up as a street? As I look at it, it's a dead end. And it's the only entry and exit that we have. It's the only way we're going to get out to Salem Heights Avenue. And it's part of the ingress and egress as people use it. It has 8 private residences, set back from the street at least 50 to 70 feet, with front yards and backyards, as I've mentioned. It's not a secondary means of transportation by any means. It's a primary. And that's part of one of the definitions that Mr. Lamprey is into. The street is 21 feet wide in a distance of about 50 yards. That turns into 23%. And I think that I would be glad to stand out here with anybody with a tape measure and measure that 50 yards for them, whether it's a curb and that distance across the street. I don't know how many maps I need to look at. Plat maps, city maps, zoning maps, R2, satellite maps, and so forth. And the word is street, not alley. So where in Salem is there an alley that has these kinds of characteristics I've given you? Absolutely nowhere. So we're all aware of the definitions of street and alley. And yes, I will agree that down by Mr. Lamprey's property, it is 18 feet wide, literally 18 feet wide. I know the right of way probably says 20, but if you measure it, it's 18 plus 3 inches, I believe. And that's how come we're naming it an alley, because it's 18 feet there and in places beyond. You know, Jim, we've had conflict with words all through our lives where, you know, you've got a word and there's 2 or 3 definitions to it. And you look at the situation, you say, well, how's it best fit? Well, how does it best fit in respect to this? Yes, it's 18 feet. You take a look at the rest of the characteristics, not even close. Now, it's been called a named alley by a drawing that, or excuse me, an architectural drawing or sketch that Mr. Lamprey sent out through actually the city did, sent out to us in and around May 3rd. But on that sketch, it says that the sketch was made, or drawing was made, on March 3rd. So in other words, it was a named alley way back in March 3rd, at least according to this drawing. Now, Pamela and the committee met again on May 10th. And they met for the purposes to decide whether this was an alley or not. And the members of that committee were Pamela and Glenn Davis and Jennifer Scott, Tony Martin, Lisa Anderson-Oberle, Olivia Diaz, Kevin Hotman, and Peter Fernandez. 3 of those were absent: Tony Martin, Kevin Hotman, and Peter Fernandez. So I said to Pamela, wait a minute, you made this decision by committee. Tell me who this committee is. So she gave me those names. So I called them. I called Glenn Davis, and he tells me that it fits the definition of an alley and that they're going to move forward and that I can appeal it. That's in so many words. And we did have a conversation. I talked to Jennifer Scott. She said, yes, I know where Crawford Street is. She said she drives by there. And I think she said that she delivers her kids, her young girls, to the dance studio down Salem Heights. She agreed to drive down Crawford Street to take a look at it. And I said to her, is this a street or an alley? And she said, well, actually, it could go either way. Okay. Tony Martin, our traffic engineer, deems this, and he was absent, but I did talk with him. He deems this no more dangerous than any other driveway in any other alley. So I asked the city of Salem to answer this. where in any place in Salem do we have a stop sign and then 10 yards from that stop line backwards, okay, we have a length of 45 yards and we're going to put 10 driveways with 18 or 19 cars in there, and we're going to call that safe. There isn't a single alley here. There isn't a single named alley in Salem. I doubt if there's one in Oregon. So then I talked to Lisa Ogilvy, and she tells me it's a matter of semantics. Well, I don't buy that. It's not semantics. I didn't talk to Olivia Diaz. I didn't talk to Peter Fernandez. I tried, I got to a secretary and I didn't get much further than that. I talked to Kevin Hotman, who was not at the meeting, but was willing to visit with me about this. He was absent. I asked him about overflow parking. He said, yeah, it's going to be a problem. He said, my interpretation, I said, what's my interpretation of this street? And he said, well, it's kind of a gray area. Well, okay, we got Jennifer Scott, and now we got Kevin Hotman, who are somewhat undecided, it sounds like. And I said, could Mr. Lamprey, could Mr. Lamprey build this complex if it was defined as a street, which it really is? And he said, no. This has been I'm sorry. If Crawford Street is already in an alley, as the architectural design showed on March 3rd that came out from Mr. Lamprey, then what was the purpose of the second meeting in March 10th to redetermine that? How's that cook up? I'm going to start closing this up for you, sir. Let's take a look at the schematics of Mr. Lamprey's driveways, starting on the northwest corner, on the south end of, on the north end of Crawford Street, 55 yards back from that stop sign. We take the first 10 yards off for setback. So now we have 45 yards to put his driveways in, perpendicular to Crawford Street. Each of those driveways are going to be 10 feet wide. It's been corrected on the drawing you're seeing there. It shows only going to be 8 feet wide. Well, they're 10. Okay, so we have in 45 yards, a distance less than half a football field. Okay, we're going to put 10 driveways that can stack 2 cars in there, in each one of them. On what street can we do this? This violates anything that can be done on a street. How many driveways are we adding to this street totally? Well, this increase of driveways, if you take a look at the driveways that go into the apartments and the driveways that go into the private residences, by putting his extra driveways down there, we've just increased this by 83%. We got 83% more driveways now in 45 yards. To me, that doesn't make a lot of good sense. I'm coming down to a conclusion here. Really. Mr. Lamprey has determined that this is an alley, and he's determined it basically on one factor. He's arguing on the tip of a pin here. He's saying that because it is 18 feet wide, it's an alley, and therefore he can move forward. It's been a failure, I believe, of the city to wrongly interpret their own definitions. And I think you have those in front of you, sir. But if we're going to have a precedent now where you have a nebulous definition of both one or the other, and we make decisions upon that, I don't think that's appropriate for the city, and I don't think it's appropriate for any part of government. I say to Mr. Lamprey, here's my chips. I'm all in. Show me, prove to me with facts. Okay, show me with facts that this is an alley. I conclude that by thanking you, sir, by thanking you, Pamela. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Shelby. I think he wants to talk to me.
I do. Now I've got to turn through notes though to find.
Absolutely.
couple of questions. So as I think about this, and dimensions seem to be part of the definition of an alley. The primary or secondary vehicle use seems to be part of that definition. And certainly we're looking to some extent about what happens along the length of this. And I appreciate your kind of walking through what's on both sides of the street. That's useful to me. Part of the way that I understand traffic is analyzed would not necessarily be by the number of entrances, but by the number of trips or the number of vehicles. And so as I think about on the south end with the duplexes, the apartment complexes, and I think there is a traffic analysis of some kind in the staff report that gives me some numbers on what the trip count would be and what the change would be from these additional driveways. What's your experience on the number of vehicles that are stacked up at any one time? Maybe we're looking at the worst time of day for traffic. What would be the number of vehicles trying to get, I assume, onto Salem Heights?
Well, yeah, that was the only direction they could go.
Yeah.
Well, does it, you know, as Mr. Lamprey said, you know, it varies through the course of the day. There are people that go in and out. I mean, I myself personally, you know, I have grandkid delivery, whatever. There's 3 or 4 trips I make a day, and other people do the same kind of thing during the rush hour down there at the north end. Yeah, there is some people that stack up. The part of the deal there is that they turn in from Salem Heights Avenue onto Crawford Street. We have to be very careful. And I realize the hedge has been brought down some, but I also know that there have been multiple times in my 45 years here where somebody's had to stand on their nose to avoid hurting something. There are pedestrians that walk, and I realize that Mr. Lamprey is suggesting a sidewalk through there, but it's really difficult for me to say exactly. You know, I'm sure that anybody would say, well, it's an uptick in the morning, it's an uptick in the evening. Emergency vehicles when they come down this street, they take it up.
Mm-hmm.
When they come out in front here, for example, with an ambulance and a fire truck, maybe a couple of police cars, there's no way anybody from down to the south end are going to get out of here. So it's really difficult for me to give you an exact number, and I think you would understand that.
Okay. So the other question that I have, and I guess this is tied to still thinking about people backing out of driveways.
Yeah.
You know, I back out of my driveway onto a street. I generally, because I'm certainly not perfect, look both directions. I've got to be careful about a sidewalk and make sure that I don't run over pedestrians. And I look for traffic coming from both directions. And sometimes that means I got to sit there and wait. And sometimes it means there's somebody parked across my driveway because there's a nearby corner. Is this going to be different qualitatively from that? Or is that just the urban reality that if this were a street or an alley, people are going to be backing out of driveways?
Well, quantitatively, I can't say that it's going to, I realize people are going to look, I realize, however, if you have two cars stacked in one parking spot, somebody's got to back out. So the first person, so my wife can get out, so I can get back in. So there's got to be multiple things there. We've got delivery trucks. We got, all kinds of things that come up and down this, garbage trucks and so forth. So there is something that falls into this. I'm not evading your question, I hope, but
I know you're thinking, so.
There's two definitions here. One, and I don't want me to jump around here, but I'm going to just say there's two different. One is a very clear definition of what a street is, and it's got a whole multiple things. There are lanes and so forth and so on. And there's two definitions, and the other definition is that of an alley, part of which fits here, and the other part doesn't fit here. It isn't secondary; it's absolutely primary. Mm-hmm. So. I'm not, like I said, I'm not dodging your question there about backing out across sidewalks and onto a street of any type.
I appreciate that. I think, certainly I've read your written materials, appreciate your testimony tonight. I find this to be an interesting question, in part because I think it is a question of kind of first impression with the city. I'm not sure this has ever come up before. Certainly hasn't in my time as a hearings officer. And, we have a mechanism for how we interpret things based on the plain language first, and then some other things. And I can see that I'm going to need to go through that methodology in making a decision here. But I'm very interested in the perspectives, which seem to be largely, well, if it's a street, it's not an alley. If it's an alley, it's not a street.
There you go.
I think the definition, at least of street, makes that pretty clear. I am interested in something. It seems like we're presented with something here that does, as the staff report says, and as I think everybody else has said, has some qualities of both. And so what does that make it? And that's going to be an interesting decision for me to make. Yep. I think the testimony that you've given is helpful in my thinking about it. So I appreciate your testimony this evening.
Can I say one last thing, sir?
Of course.
I don't know Mr. Lamprey, but I do understand that there's a need for multi-homes, multi-complexes to be built, okay? And if he wants to build something down there, great, I'm behind that, because I believe it should happen. But I am not in favor of changing the definition of something or taking a part of a definition of something. If he wants, if this is defined as a street, as it is, and he wants to build a complex there, I'll shake his hand. It's not a problem. So that's where I end with it. I've tried to show that the people here, the architecture of the street itself, the livability. I've been here for such a long time. I know everybody. They know me by first name. It's a very difficult situation for all of us to understand and to come up to that. This is an alley, and therefore we're going to be able to do this. So,
our processes are often adversarial. People don't have to be. People can disagree, and I take both of you as people operating in good faith and with good intentions. There are conflicts, and that's what we have this kind of process for. So I don't think anybody is reading any malice in your appeal any more than any malice in the applicant's desire to build something there. So let's see where we end up with this.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the staff that made this possible.
Thank you for your time this evening. That takes us to the other, go right ahead. I think you have muted, Mr. Turner.
I think I was done.
Okay, I'm sorry, saw your hand come up and thought that meant, yep, okay. With that, let's move to the other, did we have a neighborhood representative?
No,
No.
not present.
Okay, thank you. With that, I have 3 people who signed up. Don Ruffcorn is first. Mr. Ruffcorn, would you like to testify this evening?
I would. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'd like to testify as to the following permit details as I understand.
I'm
Okay,
going to.
I'll cover it. Don Ruffcorn,
Thank you.
233 Salem Heights Avenue Southeast, just across from the property in question. Okay.
Go right ahead, sir.
So I was going to do a little preamble here. I'd like to testify as to the following permit details as I understand them. I have previously submitted a written hearing rebuttal, which has a lengthier description. First, I'd like to start off with just some comments about what I've heard. It's my understanding that Crawford Street is primary access. Those people down there have no other way of getting in or out. There was a comment about the impact of widening Crawford, and yes, it would create chaos. It's quite a widening for people down there. But on the other hand, it's my impression that neighbors want it widened. They do support it. They would be happy with it. I have a little comment about the staff reports of a loading zone or something that isn't provided with this apartment complex. Given that Crawford is the only access, if there's no loading zone and a truck's parked on Crawford, that blocks traffic in and out. So, if you take the definition of Crawford as an alley, it suddenly starts blocking access. With that, I just have 3 points I'd like to read. One is that the planning department should recognize that Crawford Street is a street, and it exists as a street really by their hand, by their past conduct. I claim that Crawford Street's a street because of the City of Salem street definition for primary ingress and egress, and that the planning department's permit issuance for properties fronting Crawford Street, they've issued permits since 1946. My key point is that the planning department needs to recognize that Crawford Street's a street that exists by their hand, and to now provide planning and remedy resident issues. We've heard some of the issues. The objectivity of this permit's compliance, I feel, was compromised by first declaring that Crawford Street is an alley, and then subsequently issuing a finding that Crawford Street's an alley. They put the cart before the horse, or they defined what they wanted to do and followed up. In my opinion, this is a biased permit compliance process without first settling the street versus the alley question, which invalidates this permit issuance. Second point, loss of housing in Salem. Crawford Street's a dead end 20-foot right of way. Nobody doubts that. And it's been that way since 1946. The planning department has permitted single family housing and apartments to be built. Over 100 occupants now occupy Crawford Street. These permits wouldn't be granted today on a 20-foot right-of-way. It's unfortunate that they were in the past without then widening Crawford Street. The city has many zoned RM2 lots fronting Crawford, which are not buildable on the existing 20-foot right-of-way. Single-family dwellings and apartments may not be rebuildable in case of fire, resulting in a loss of housing. Updating of housing to a higher density for some of the low density apartment units is likewise not possible. Widening of Crawford Street requires a street setback on the applicant's property, which might be the first start of widening Crawford. Point number 3, Public Works Department judges Crawford Street width, but not its usage. The Public Works Department treatment of Crawford as an alley is a reflection of its width, but not its usage as a street. After 70 years as a street, the planning department is preempted from now calling it an alley. It needs to be widened to make a 40-foot width street rather than a dead end 20-foot right of way for ingress and egress.
1 minute.
Pardon?
You have 1 more minute of testimony.
Okay, good. I'm just about done. Importantly, this permit blocks enforcement of blocks the development of future RM2 units, reducing housing for the city of Salem. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ruthcorn. I have read your written comments, and I'll probably be reviewing them again. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill Giorso. Mr. Giorso, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And if you would give your name and address, and then we'll give you 5 minutes to.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to, there we are.
There you are.
I'm a Selectrix typewriter guy, so this is, this Zoom is new for me. So my address is 494 State Street, Suite 300, Salem, Oregon 97301. Mr. Brewer, I'm an attorney here in Salem, and my client is Margaret Bates, who's right here to my right. And there was a comment earlier by, I think it was Mr. Turner, had identified my client as the owner of the apartments at the south end of the street, Berthwood Court. Mrs. Bates did not receive the original notice of this matter. She did find out late. I found out about it yesterday, and have a few comments. I do not think, based on what I've heard, that I'm going to need or ask for the record to be kept open 7 days. I think the record is being put together fairly well by everyone that's participated. So a couple of points I want to make, Mr. Brewer. One is there's been characterization about sort of ambiguity in the definition of a street or an alley here in the city of Salem, and there really isn't any ambiguity at all. And this matter is really decided definitively on the Chapter 111 definitions of the Salem, Oregon Code of Ordinances. The thing to understand about the definition of street is that it expressly excludes alley from the definition. These are mutually exclusive ways of traveling around. You can't blend them, you can't interchange them. Street means a public or private way that is created to provide ingress or egress to one or more lots, parcels, areas, or tracts of land. The two next sentences have to do with excluding that from forestry and mining, agricultural purposes, etc. The third sentence talks about the term street includes the terms highway, thoroughfare, parkway, thoroughway, road, avenue, boulevard, lane, court, place, loop, drive, circle, and other such terms. But the most important part is the last sentence that says the term street does not include alleys or flag lots. If it's a street, it cannot be an alley. They don't coexist. They can't be interchangeable. So this street, Crawford Street, is much the same as many other streets in that particular area of town. Bradley Drive to the south. If you looked at photographs, they're interchangeable. Neff Avenue to a little farther east is the same type of unimproved street, a small strip of blacktop asphalt with no curbs, no storm drains, no sidewalks. This characterizes very much of Salem, West Salem, and especially east side of town. If you go out east of Lancaster Drive, this is what you see. So if there was a widening project out there, most of the neighbors would welcome it to improve that street, include curbs and sidewalks. It enhances the value of their property. There's nothing negative about a widening project typically. This street, it's been said by a couple of the witnesses that it is the exclusive way to get in and out of these other properties. The plat map shows at least, there are a number 9 kind of properties, not including my client. Lot 3343 is an 18-unit complex. Lot 3384, just abutting it to the south, is 6 units. My client has 28-unit apartment complex. That, together with the other homeowners of single-family dwellings like Mr. Turner, use this street exclusively to get in and out of their homes to Salem Heights. The definition of an alley is a public way not less than 10 feet and more than 20 feet. You could say, well, there's a common denominator there. But in addition to the width, an alley is primarily used as a secondary means of motor vehicle traffic. There is nothing secondary about this. 100% of all of these people use this roadway as the primary exclusive way to get to and from their homes.
You have 1 minute, Bill.
Thank you. The definitions resolve this issue. It is not an alley. It cannot ever become an alley because of the exclusivity of ingress and egress. Secondly, it unreasonably impacts neighbors. Can you imagine, Mr. Brewer, everyone who lives on this street, they're going to have to change their addresses from Crawford Street to Crawford Alley? The post office doesn't deliver mail to alleys. If any of these people go to sell their homes, the listing is 3350 Crawford Alley. The problems that creates in first responders, the fire department has to know if they have a 911 call from Crawford Alley, that really means Crawford Street. This is unmanageable in terms of the precedent it would set if we start mincing and mixing and commingling alleys and streets. That's all I have.
Well, thank you for your testimony this evening. I particularly appreciate the conversation about those definitions. I think that what I'm interested in thinking about the definition of alley, it has the dimensional part, the 10 to 20 feet. And then it describes what that 10 to 20 feet is used for, primarily as secondary, which again is kind of a weird wording, primarily as secondary. You've given me some things to think about. I appreciate that. I do have a question about, I see Mrs. Bates has also signed up to testify. Does she intend to, or did you testify for her?
I think we covered the points we needed to make. Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Didn't really want to put somebody on the spot. You're not required to testify, Mrs. Bates. I see you there. Thank you. With that, I think that is everybody that we had signed up to testify. Would the applicant like to offer rebuttal? It would be limited to points raised in opposition and 5 minutes. And I see the host has stopped my video.
That's my fault.
Okay, are we still on?
Yes, I was just stopping the testimony video, but I accidentally stopped yours. That's my fault.
Okay. So, Mr. Lamprey, do you want to make a rebuttal?
Yeah, I'll quickly go down through it. Mr. Turner, first of all, I was and I am not the one that named Crawford an alley. So I don't know where your conspiracy theory is coming there. The first time I ever heard that Crawford was an alley and was to treat it like an alley was August 13th at the pre-app meeting. There was a pre-app report written after that clearly stated Crawford is an alley and it needs to be treated as an alley. So that's how we designed accordingly. We've spent tens of thousands of dollars with engineering, design, legal fees to make sure this project works. We've based it on the fact that the city has represented to us that Crawford is an alley, and we did that in good faith. There, at one point, somebody mentioned that the applicant needs to prove that Crawford is an alley. Well, that lies with the city. That shouldn't lie with me. That's not fair in this situation. Now, in some applications, it does apply, but in this, it does not apply. So it's not fair to say that I'm the one that needs to prove that Crawford is an alley. Next, I do like that Mr. Turner and Mr. Rothkorn and now the Bates family has represented that they want to participate in a street widening program. However, is that being honest and forthright? Because a lot of buildings on the house across the street would have to be demolished from me. They're right on they're not even 5 feet off the alley in some spots. There's other driveways that have used a turnaround mechanism that would have to go all the way away. There's some sheds that would have to go away. I think one of the apartment buildings, if you got into the 15 feet on both sides, would have to go away. So it becomes a really cumbersome process if you're going to do that. And right now, if you look at the city of Salem, we have a number, and the attorney addressed it, we have a number of streets that are unimproved, right? And we also have a number of alleys that are unimproved. We are currently doing a development on an alley in Salem that's 16 feet wide, and we followed the setbacks that are required in the RM2, and that development has happened without any problem. So there is development that happens on alleys. There are alleys in Salem where there's driveways for homes as well as driveways for multifamily. So it does exist. It is in Salem. I'm doing a project on one right now. So that's all I have. Thank you. Once again, I really appreciate everyone in the process. I'm working in good faith. I have no hard feelings towards anyone or any problems there. And I appreciate everybody's input.
So thank you for that. I think it is fair to say that although it's your burden to meet the criteria, it's going to be my burden to determine whether this is a street or an alley. And from that, the rest of the decision on this appeal would flow. So, and I particularly appreciate what I think is really good faith and well-meaning testimony from people representing their points of view. And I think everyone has done that very well this evening. Since we don't have a request to hold the record open, I do need to ask you if you waive as the applicant, your final written argument, which is also 7 days. That's really up to you at this point.
Yeah, I don't think at this point I want to waive that.
Okay. So with that, what I will do is, and I know that there is some urgency to meet the 120 days, which will be August 31st. Today is the 11th. So can you have your final written argument to staff by the 18th at 5 o'clock, and they'll get that to me, and I'll then push a decision out pretty fast after that.
Yes, I'll do what I can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that is all that we have on the agenda. I will say it is important to the city to have public participation. We appreciate it. With that, Shelby, I think we are done for the evening.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.